back with a fedora hat and a little cigar and maverick tie, looking very cool. It's just a totally unique mixture, a totally unique sound, you know. And the amount of people he's influenced, you know, it's just really strange that he's not recognised.
The first time I ever actually saw him, he was wearing a cord collarless suit with a big blouse with a big frill down the front.
This aura about him, you didn't really feel you could approach him. You know, he was such a god, if you like, of the guitar. You were kind of lost in his presence, you know.
He came into the shop occasionally, but he was like on another planet.
If I expected love when first we kissed, blame it on my youth. If only just for you I did exist, blame it on my youth. I believe in everything like a child of 3. You meant more than everything for all the world to see. If only you were on my mind night and day, blame it on my youth. If I forgot to eat and sleep and pray, blame it on my youth. If I cried a little bit when first I heard the truth, don't blame it on my heart, blame it on my youth. I once had a sweetheart, but now I have none. I once had a sweetheart, but now I have none. She's gone. Last night in sweet slumber I dreamed I did see Last night in sweet slumber I dreamed I did see my own darling jewel sat smiling by me. My old darling jewel sat smiling by me.
It was 1960 when I came up to London to work at Collett's, which was a very scruffy little folk and jazz shop in New Oxford Street, and it was part of a chain run by Collett's, which were left-wing bookshop, and we were left to get on with it, and we survived for about 29 years.
And you ran the folk department?
Yeah, but it was started by Bill Leader, who worked for Topic Records as a recording man. He discovered Bert Jantz and all kinds of other people. Very important man.
You could go to clubs and hear people singing without a backing band. You know, I always assumed that musicians had a backing band, and suddenly found I don't think I even knew what these clubs were called, if they were called folk clubs, but I became aware that there was another strata underneath rock and roll. So it was very much a word of mouth thing, best I remember it. You know, you'd find out so and so was coming to the club next week, and make sure you got down there to see him or her. And they would get people like Davey and Bert and John Ramborn, you know, the main names in the 60s.
Coming out of skiffle, people like Martin Carthy were young lions then, and beginning to develop a guitar technique that was quite different. But Davey played in folk clubs, he was accepted in folk clubs, because the folk scene, to its eternal credit, has always accepted the odd wild, in the same way as years later it accepted Disley and Stephen Grappelli. Folk world has always had this enormous, underneath some of the intolerance, it's always had an enormous tolerance for the oddball instrumentalist. And Davey was an oddball and a superb instrumentalist.
Come on, let me try and cut the mustard here.
Get it on.
It was quite big at the time. There used to be a lot of folk programs on television. I think I just liked it. It was the first thing I liked after you sort of got off pop music, then the blues, and then it was folk music, really.
Les Cousins, Greek Street. It was an all-nighter. And we saw people like Paul Simon, Bob Dylan, you name it, you know, Al Stewart, Bert Jans, Davy Graham. And there's also the Troubadour, which started very early on, a little coffee bar in Earl's Court. Yeah, I don't know how I stood it, because they were both very small basements, you know, and crowded and unhealthy. Went on for hours and hours, all night sometimes. Yeah. People dossing on the floor.
There was a place called the Yellow Door in the next street to where I lived, in Waterloo. And I used to get the overflow from whoever, it was a sort of early hippie commune. Pete Framers described it that, and I used to get the overflow. And one day there was a knock at the door, and David Graham was standing there with a man called Neil Rock, who he was busking the streets with. I hadn't heard him at this time, and I was a sort of failing skiffler, or skiffle was failing badly at the time. And Davey came in, sort of greeted everybody with that charm and politeness he shows so well when he wants to. And he went out in the backyard and perched himself on the wall and started playing Bruns's House Rent Stomp. And the whole room, it was only a tiny room about the size of this balcony here, but we all went very, very quiet. And we knew the world had changed, I mean that quite literally, because he was, all us skifflers going chonk, 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 chonk. And there was David going, couldn't believe it. And we knew then, and that was the first time I ever saw him, and he came and played in the backyard, and I thought, this is it, this is something new happening.
I hear Paul Simon asked you to join him at one point. Is that true?
So what are you doing? He said, Art Garfunkel's going into films. I had no idea that this was happening so much for Paul. I should have realised when you invited Bert Jans and myself to lunch at the Hills on the 22nd floor that something was cooking. Paul said, well, would you join me? And I said, very kindly. I was most impressed that he'd asked me. But, I didn't really know. I did know how good he was because I'd heard him in the Troubadour, you know, singing. When he sang Who Will Love a Little Sparrow, and the song was so gentle, you know, that the Troubadour was absolutely wrapped, not a foot moved, nobody coughed right the way through his performance. I thought, there's a master there, make people be quiet. Because the way to make an audience quiet is to play quiet. If you start playing loud, you do it badly anyway because you're irritated, and it shows.
I was a bit scared of Davey. He was so different, very exotic, you know. He used to travel a lot, which we didn't do so much in those days, very exotic places, and he dressed differently to people. He wasn't a hippie, you know, very smart man.
His first album, Martin Windsor, wrote in the notes somewhere, I have all the things the little jobs he had had. One of them was burglar. I thought, well, I thought maybe he's joking, trying to be nice to the old ladies with the cucumber sandwich with the vicar on the lawn. Yeah. His vernacular, he didn't have to swear at you. Windsor would look at you, you'd be terrified. Yeah.
There's more beers outside.
Perhaps he was into some Crowley-esque thing, of which I know not.
There's something a bit evil about him, wasn't there?
Oh yes, yeah. The only thing I was ashamed of, we went picked up this guy called Peanuts. Martin Windsor, I took the lid off this dustbin and Martin Windsor put this guy Peanuts in the dustbin and I put the lid. It was a silly joke, we pranked that we played, figuring that a boy would grow out of it, a girl might not grow out of that. I said I'm ashamed to say Martin Windsor with him. And then later there was that Cat Stevens album with the dustbin with the teardrop coming out, and they knew, everybody, the whole city knew all about it. There wasn't even so fair to put it about, and everybody knew. It was a grapevine.
What's that?
Well, that we put Peanuts in the dustbin, me and Martin.
Brothers and sisters you see a lot.
I think Davey might have developed his lyric skills a little further if he perhaps regarded himself as a better singer, perhaps a more powerful singer. You know? I mean, I happen to like his singing. There are points when you hear his voice, even if he's not right on the note, where he has a real charm to the way he puts something over vocally. But he tended to sing blues. He tended to perhaps be not so keen to write things for vocal. Travelling Man is a good example.
Come with me, there are many lands to see and new places to be. Oh my love, won't you be with your traveling man? With your traveling man. Take your time, there's no need to hurry, there ain't no worries with your traveling man. With your traveling man. The time we can't borrow. Why wait till tomorrow to the sun? Won't you run with the traveling man? With the traveling man.
Davey was one of the originators of what would now be called world music. He was one of the first people, even before the jazz players like Coltrane and the Beatles with their connection with the Indian music. He was travelling to North Africa and Eastern Europe and using music from there.
I think he was the first to do it. I mean, I've got an old tape with Whiz Jones on it, and he says, you know, that Davey did it and they all wanted to do it. And I think Whiz Jones actually says he was in France. He was in Paris or someplace, and he said Davey came walking up the street looking like a suntanned god with his guitar on his back, and he thought, wow, I want to be like that.
The thing is, you have to be a musician really completely. You have to learn in 2 or 3 languages at least the names of the notes of the scale, and if possible sing in Sangeet, and set about trying to play a couple of favourite rags, you know, like Des or Kamod or Shivranjani, or the few that I did learn helped me with jazz and helped me improvising in other situations. And I was just expecting something from my unconscious book just come into my hands, you know.
Dave Swarbricker said that he was totally stunned when he heard him at the Troubadour, for example. He said not only was nobody doing that sort of thing, he said nobody was even thinking that it could be done. And I think that's the point about Davey. His revolution was a conceptual one as much as a technical one. He developed new ways of thinking about the guitar, and this affected everybody who came afterward.
I think Davey ran into a lot of difficulties in his childhood that perhaps most people wouldn't be aware of because they didn't have those difficulties. He had a brown skin.
I remember stories about him going around South London at a time when the sign still said no Irish and no coloured. And of course, this being a mixed marriage, they had trouble finding somewhere to live.
His early life. No, I don't want to get into that.
Sitting in my mother's room, with coffee percolated, sort of bottles from apothecaries' shops, bottles with different coloured fluids in them. Beautiful the way my mother furnished everything.
And what about your dad?
Well, he was a Gaelic teacher. He didn't want to go into the army, and Gaelic was his first language, you see, not his second. English was my first language, but it wasn't, I've been adding onto it, so to speak, but he taught Gaelic at the City Lit for 17 years, and one of his students is my brother-in-law, John Lindsay. Plays piano, lovely piano, lives up in Berwick. I'm rambling.
No, you're not.
You know the famous story about the pavan. He was 12 years old, so the story goes, and he went into the house of a man next door, a chiropodist or something of that nature, and the man had a guitar. And seeing Davey's interest, he played this pavan for him. They were all going out on a picnic and asked Davey to come, and he said, no, I want to stay and play the guitar. And they'd all laughed at him and left. But the story is that when they came back, he could play that pavan. And he has, although he'd never seen a guitar before, and he has had an ability to reproduce anything he's heard once. Eidetic memory. It's quite extraordinary, that. But he didn't have his own guitar for another 4 years. I think he was 16 when he got his own guitar.
Just history. History. My daughter, there's Mercy. I had two marriages I consider important, the ones I had my children by,
Who were they? Who were the children?
The children, well, Kim is the eldest, she's a painter now. And Mercy is Rani, she's in Australia with a house that she built and a son that she had. She tells me about the time when Saxon Blue, that's his name, her son, was sitting in the garden, and while he was playing there, a boa constrictor came and ate the kitten, and he just sat entranced by this, didn't do a thing about it being a child, just watched his boa constrictor eat the kitten. Very strange. But they are quite real, those serpents. I married to Holly, an American from Florida. We were divorced now, but we divorced in Vancouver in 1990. That's Holly. Holly. This is our wedding day. She's embroidered these wings on my back on my denim shirt. But I've always been bad managing money. I've never been very shrewd. But somehow I've always had either a bed to sleep in, my feet dry, my stomach full, for long enough to make a decision about what was a priority, for my family or for somebody else on the road. I came down south on the coach to go to Palma to do my stint at the weekly stint, for a week in the Centro La Guitarra run by Peter and Rita Burr. And I met Mary Malone, who was Sir Robert Graves' nurse, on the coach, and she was charming. And I was, of course, impressed. I'd read Caligula, and I'd read I Claudius and Claudius the God and Count Belisarius and all that, And she invited me back and made me an omelette, a lovely omelette. I always made it a practice to practice memorising words of foreign languages anywhere when I'm travelling or doing something I don't like. Like the girl who could speak 7 languages and couldn't say no in any of them. It's just, it's perfectly true that that happens if you learn too much. Because you're basically the same person in any language. You express things, different things, not really. You don't express different things. Well, a DAD-GAD tuning was invented by me in Tangier in '61. I was looking for a tuning that would be for guitar and sitar or sarod. So I took the tuning of sitar and sarod, both of which I learned to play very badly. And you have root fifth, and then root subdominant ascending, or sa, pa, sa, ma ascending in the playing strings, and the rest are all sympathetic, so on one of those, so you haven't got to think about that.
I was speaking to Martin Carthy on the phone recently, and he said that the tunings he now uses weren't invented by Davey, but they were based on Davey's famous Dag-Gad tuning. And he said Davey kicked the door down. He said we owe him, we all do. There isn't a guitarist around today who doesn't owe Davey Graham something.
You were just amazed by the things that he did, and of course he had these tunings that were different, that most people weren't aware that he was tuning differently, and so when they went home with the standard tuning, the things that he played just sounded totally crazy and didn't work at all. Davey's tunings brought out something in the music that was different. He'd studied, Arab music and different things, and realised that by changing the tuning he'd get closer to the way that they were playing on instruments other than guitar, I suspect. But a lot of people weren't aware of that, so it took a while to realise that the tuning was so important. Of course, when people would see him live, they'd see him tuning the guitar and sort of watch what his fingers were doing and figure the whole thing out. And it wasn't like he kept it a secret.
Now, you haven't oiled the machine heads.
I've not looked after it very well, have I?
Same machine oil, or 11 units of salad oil, vegetable oil, just a drop on each one of these machine heads. And when you take the strings off, gives the machine heads a good wind round. Do that every 6 months. Make sure they're always moist with, dust doesn't get in there, funnily enough, it's not a place of dust it gets into. Put a drop of oil on each one of those machine heads.
And there was no chat. He just played one number and then moved on to the next number. For some strange reason, I remember he broke a top string, and this young lad in the audience happened to have a guitar, and he got up and offered Davey his guitar, and he just shook it and said no. And somebody else asked him to play Angie, and he just shook his head, smiled, he said, "I forget it."
You will not get Davey Graham to play Angie.
I went down with my girlfriend at the time to the Gar and Gimp Coffee House, which was just off Villiers Street then, and quite by chance there was Davey with a young woman, and the young woman happened to be a student in Margaret's classes. Margaret was a classics teacher. And it could have been embarrassing because she hadn't been in class for a couple of days. She'd fallen for Davey Graham, I suppose. But anyway, Davey showed his usual charm and he said, "Listen, this is Angela and I've written this tune for her." And he started playing it, and of course we were totally entranced, as everybody else was, with the tune, Angie. And awkward questions about where her student had been for the last few days were forgotten.
So I would really like Davey.
I'm the only bass player.
Yo!
I'm the only bass player who's recorded this for Davey Graham, aren't I?
I'm the only one to get Davey to play Angie. The only one on the planet. Do it for me, Davey.
Well, what I know of, I know from Ray Smith at Ray's Jazz Shop, who, I mean, he was a sort of Soho character in the 50s and 60s.
Well, there's several stories about Angie.
According to him, Angie was, she worked in a little coffee bar on Monmouth Street. So I invited her out for what was going to be a really lovely day, but of course the night before, he went out, he was a drummer as well and played, and he was playing a gig and got completely smashed. And so I missed the boat on that one. And obviously Davey stepped in, and there we are.
I'm the only one to get Davey to play Angie. The only one on the planet. Do it for me, Davey.
But I know it's earned Davey more money than anything else. In fact, he once told me that on the strength of the royalties from it, he bought his mother a car, albeit an old banger, and himself a tartan suit.
It was beginning to become a background sound of parties. I mean, in the 60s, you couldn't go into a party without finding a guitarist in the corner trying to play Angie.
I remember teaching Paul Simon in a club I was helping to run. He said, does anyone know the middle bit of Angie? And I said, yeah, I do. And so I taught him that. He would have learnt it anyway. It's a good story. And then he recorded it.
If you were a guitarist, you had to be able to play Angie. But, of course, it never went in the charts or anything like that, but it was incredibly influential. It broke open the whole pedestrian guitar style that was happening at the time, or had happened, and led the way for all these brilliant, dexterous performers you can still hear around today. I think it wouldn't be a bad thing if all those guitarists who've made a lot of money by developing the points that Davey Graham started for them, I think it wouldn't be a bad idea if they clubbed together and bought Davey Graham a pension.
I've always been lucky. I've always seemed to be the centre of attention, consequently. But you do have to know what to do with an audience when you're a centre of attention. It's no good being a centre of attention without knowing how to handle it.
There's no problem so big you can't run away from it.
Frustrating anyway. Once you can do it, what's the point of pretending you can do anything else? I went into care. I started doing a care assistant program for a while, working with disabled in Hackney. Didn't last for but a couple of months, but I enjoyed doing it.
You were bored with playing guitar?
No, washing windows on ambulances, serving lunches, cleaning all the windows.
I remember that.
Mr. Clean, they used to call me. I gave up exercise in my 50s because I thought I'd had quite enough of that. I overdid that as well. I overdid everything in my life. my jogs around the park turned into walks around the park. Then they turned into bicycle rides around the park. That's where I am now. I've got a flat tyre.
When you've got a degree in something, you can take advantage because you know the difference between price and value. You know the difference between level and category. You can think in temporal spheres. You don't have to think that there is time. You can think outside time. And when I realised those things, I stopped rushing around in the rat race, waiting, chasing my buck. I realised it would come to me if I was any good, you know.
This Davey Graham revival, and this revival of interest, is not only paying a due amount of respect to a great innovator and a great artist, but I think it was improbable. Davey hadn't been too well for a while, and it didn't seem likely it was going to happen. But it has happened.
It's only in the last, it's nice that in the last few months since several companies have reissued a lot of Davey's stuff. Topic have done quite a bit of his Decca stuff, and Roller Coaster have done his live things and all that media LP. I think people are slowly beginning to become aware of him, which is really nice. It's finally getting his dues, and a lot of younger people seem to be getting into it.
If it can get to a wider audience, I think that's wonderful, because again, he's been one of these players who, I mean, he's well known amongst collectors and people who are into that kind of music anyway. And I mean, the original records have been going for ridiculous amounts of money ever since I can remember, and they've been very hard to get.
It was years after one of his best-selling records, Folk Roots, New Roots, was deleted, and everyone was coming in the shop asking for it. So I thought it would be a good exercise to reissue it, start a company. So I started Righteous Records and leased the tape from Decca, and it did very well considering I didn't have much money.
I think for a lot of younger people he's this legendary figure, but until recently they couldn't really buy much because there was nothing in the shops, until the Roller Coaster CD sparked off the revival, really.
The current Davey connection really came about through John Pilgrim, who was the washboard player with the Vipers Skiffle Group.
I didn't really see him after he went to Paris on that first European trip, until he walked into my room at Hull University in 1967. There's a knock at the door, and his voice said, "Disley told me you were here." Disley always comes into this at some point or another. I was very pleased to see him, and I sort of made some tea and we started talking and he started playing.
And recorded what I thought when I heard it was just an amazing, amazing session. I mean, I think that's the way I remember Davey playing. Not so much on his albums that he made in the 60s, but live. That was the essence of Davey. That was him, the musician, rather than the produced musician.
It was recorded on one track of a 4-track Philips domestic tape recorder with a handheld mic, and there was no, I had no earphones or anything else, so I'm really astonished that the sound came out as well as it did. He'd been at the folk club and I didn't even know it. He'd come and knocked on my door, wandered in, started playing, a few undergraduates came in. They could sense there was something special going on too. The big thing about that was, in those days, you have very curious regulations about the opposite sexes. And You weren't allowed women in your rooms on, I think, Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays or something. And this was a Saturday night, and it was 1 in the morning anyway. And at 1 in the morning, the warden of the hall came in, and Davey had just started. She moved through the fair. And this was wonderful. He just stood there, listened to the whole piece, nodded to me and went out again. And the following day he said, what I like about Mr. Pilgrim is he manages his excesses so that I don't have to notice officially.
I was so glad to be indoors, I don't think I noticed.
And it was just by chance that...
I don't remember the warden coming in
just
either.
knocked on his door.
Save it with the warden.
But the fact that John Pilgrim happened to be working there.
Well, I was so knocked up that he was the bee's knees to me at the time. I thought, I've slept with his wife, he doesn't mind. Christ.
Is that part of the contract?
No, just that he seemed so above this sort of mentality, you know.
And everybody liked it. Nobody talked. They sat there and listened breathlessly. And this was a lot of drunk undergraduates, remember, so the amount of impact he had was astonishing. And I carried that tape around for 30 years. I knew it was special, but I wasn't sure how special until I played it to Dave Swarbrick. And he said, you've got to get that out.
That sort of started the relationship with Davey. You know, I got in touch with him to clear his part of the recordings and to get his permission to put these things out. And we then got started on a whole David Graham issue program and reissue program.
Life is a circus and money's hello, goodbye. Life is a circus and money's hello, goodbye. And I don't need a preacher to tell me the reasons why. Love is the fire and my life burns in me. Love is the fire and my life burns in me. Come on, Mr. Preacher, why don't you be like me? Please don't ask me what's happening, the world is upside down. Please don't ask me what's happening, the world is upside down. But I've got to move till they put me in the ground.
When that came out, we sold bucket loads of it. Partly, as I was saying, by playing it in the shop. People, you know, you'd have occasions where people just buy 2 copies, one for themselves and one for a friend, because they just liked it so much. Never heard of it before.
I don't know if the Davey Graham revival was due to come about, or whether the release of that album prompted the Davey Graham revival, if you like. I mean, when I first met Davey, after that album had been put together, ready for release, he didn't seem to be doing very much. He wasn't very keen on performing live. And he's now returned more or less to live performing. He's a little reticent, I think, sometimes. But he's got back into doing what people love to hear him doing, that's performing live.
I'd done a tape with Jill Cook, and she asked me if I'd like a tape in return for the tape I'd done for her, and I said, how about David Graham, have you got any of his records? I knew she'd been involved in London folk scene. She said, sure, so he did a compilation of some of David's old Decca albums in the 60s. And I took that tape home and listened to it that night, and it just really blew me away. And it was, when you put a kind of music on you haven't heard before and it just totally gets you there, you know. It was like that, especially the song Majou. You know, it's very sort of Arabic sounding instrumental, you know. And the next day I was just walking down the road in Camden, and I bumped into a mate of mine, and he's, you know, we were just chatting. He said, "What have you been listening to lately?" And I said, "You know, this guy David Graham. Have you ever heard of him?" And he said, "David Graham lives across the road from you." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, he lives across the road from you." So the next thing was, you know, I rang Jill Cook up to thank her for the tape, and you know, transpired that she still knew David and was still in touch with him, and you know, offered to sort of take me around to meet him. And he opened the door, like making William Burroughs with a guitar or something, you know, a very sort of enigmatic, mysterious character, you know. We spent several hours around there just sort of drinking tea one afternoon, and you know, he played us a few songs and stuff, and dug out a lot of old jazz records and stuff. And that night, later on, he came back to my flat with his guitar, and I invited a few friends around, and he sort of did an impromptu concert for us for about 2 or 3 hours, which was like amazing, because you know, one minute you're listening to this CD of him playing in someone's bedroom back in 1967, and the next thing you're sitting in your bed in your bedroom playing to your mates, which was just completely mind blowing. You know.
I think it's one of those things where it's just hit the right sort of time. I think there's an interest generally in what you might call roots music or you know, real music, non-electronic music. But I think probably more than anything, he's a real, you know, it's real raw emotion you can hear in his best work, and it comes across.
I think I was frustrated at the amount of people who knew of Davey by reputation, but they hadn't actually heard anything, or they didn't know anything about him. So we thought about selling the records, and then we thought a fanzine would be a good vehicle for it. I'd written to him before in the past, but really when After Hours came out, and I read the sleeve notes on that, I don't know, it just sounded like he'd given up, and it sounded very final, and I felt, I don't know, sad, nostalgic, whatever, to think that there weren't going to be any more Davey Graham albums, because that's what it sounded like. So I just wrote to him and said, you know, how much I'd enjoyed his playing over the years, and we started writing. Then he did a folk festival at Takeley Park down in Devon, and we went down to see him there. At Stamford, we organised some of his arrangements. And when he got there, he was sort of greeted like the conquering hero, really. There were people had brought all their albums for him to sign, and they hadn't seen him for years, so a lot of people didn't actually know him because they hadn't seen a recent picture of Davey. Davey's workshop was brilliant. It was supposed to hold about 20 people, but there must have been about 50 people there because they'd all come to see this legend.
But you hear his stuff everywhere. I mean, I walked into the eye clinic in Ipswich Hospital recently, and there was what the After Hours CD was on in the waiting room until the sister stormed across and said to the consultant, "This isn't suitable." I think they were playing cocaine at the time, so it probably wasn't.
I don't think Davey's ever courted fame, really. I think he's got quite simple needs, really. I think it pleases him to think that people want to listen to him, but I think he's quite happy just living and taking life a day at a time.
What's this about? Puts the foot on the chair. Puts his foot on a chair.
No, Josh White never used to sit down when he played and sang. He would stand with his foot on an ordinary standard kitchen chair.
But you don't feel obliged to imitate that?
No, but it's a good idea. It's a good posture for singing with a guitar.
Yeah.
If you want to play the guitar properly, it's better than the classical.
Do you want me to bring a chair in, though?
No, I wasn't complaining about the tools again. What's it going to play? I can't remember.
You're going to play Josh White?
Josh.
My tune.
Well, I want you and I need you, and I'm all packed up to go. So, baby, if you love me, won't let me go. True love love me, I'm gonna walk right out of your door. But I hope that you stop me. Let me hear you coming, darling, once more. I want you and I need you, and I'm all packed up to go. And if your love is true, if you don't say you love me, I'm gonna walk right out your door. But I hope that you stop me and let me hear you coming, darling, once more. I love you, yes I love you, with all my heart and soul. And if your love isn't true now, don't let me go.
The maestro!